Okay, Monerans is synonymous with bacteria. It's basically the same thing. Okay, Monerans is the kingdom of eubacteria and archaebacteria lumped together. But if I say Monerans, you should understand that we're talking about bacteria. Okay? The quiz that we have on Thursday. Yeah. Is true, false, some of it. So it'll be 50-50, but you will have to explain if it's false, why it's false. You have to change the statement to tell me the true statement. Okay? So it's 50-50, but you got to be able to explain to get full credit. All right? And then these next notes are true of all Monerans. So number 1, all Monerans are smaller than cells. All Monerans are smaller than cells. They can affect cells and how cells work and what cells do. So they are smaller.
Do we write that thing under the bacteria?
No, do you?
Oh.
Next one, all Monerans, usually most of them do not produce their own food. Means they have to feed on something. Except, there are always exceptions, except for blue-green bacteria. Blue-green bacteria, also known as cyanobacteria or cyanophytes. Okay, cyan is in both of those. Cyan, if you know that color, is somewhat blue-green. It's tealish, whatever you want to call it. But that's what helps me remember that cyanobacteria is blue-green bacteria, though they can produce their own food. Most of the bacteria that you think about, though, including the nightmare bacteria that we just talked about or watched a video on, has to feed on things.
Cyan is kind of like brown.
No, it's not.
I'm going to disagree with you there, but
Honestly, it's kind of red.
I know.
okay. So moving on, number 3, all Monerans are prokaryotes. Pro means before. This literally translates to before nucleus. They have no nucleus. Pro means no. Pro means no. If something is a prokaryote, it is prokaryotic. Okay, those are 2 different forms of the word prokaryote. If something is a prokaryote, it is prokaryotic. Pro means no. Monerans do not have nuclei. They do have genetic material or nuclear material, but they do not have a nucleus. All Monerans lack mitochondria, means they don't have them. They do not have mitochondria, but they have many ribosomes. Ribosomes synthesize proteins or make proteins, create proteins, you can say make. Okay, you know, it's been a while since we've studied our cell organelles. Okay, but ribosomes make proteins. They do not have a powerhouse of the cell, the mitochondria, which engages in cellular respiration. We should know that. The mitochondria takes food and makes it into energy via cellular respiration. They don't have that. They have to create their energy by other means. Mm-hmm. You do?
Gavin, you fix like a ribosome.
All right, moving on.
Carter, you have a point.
I know.
Shaped like a goatee body.
Okay. These Monerans reproduce usually through binary fission and also budding. So binary fission is just splitting in half. Binary means 2, right? Budding is, I don't know if you remember this, we talked about it a while back, but it's where the bacteria will have like a little bud off of it, and that bud will turn into another bacteria. So if we look at a brown bacteria right here, and it's going to reproduce via budding. There you go. It's going to continue. Okay. And eventually,
Looks like a bird.
thank you.
That does
Looks like
not.
an
That
airplane.
does not look like a bird.
Eventually, we have 2 new bacteria. Whereas binary fission is it just splits in half. So an example of binary fission would look like this. Okay.
It's obviously a Moneran reproducing by using
Yeah, guys. Dirty white people. What do you mean?
That looks like a pair of glasses.
Okay.
No.
So this is budding, or sorry, this is binary fission, and this is budding. Both of these are forms of asexual reproduction, meaning it only needs one parent, creates an exact genetic copy.
Do you have the same atoms though?
Yes. The biggest question is,
Ow.
is Carter are you even a human?
I can destroy matter.
So those are the 5 characteristics of Monerans that you need to remember. Smaller than cells. Usually have to feed on something, but some can make their own food. Cyanophytes and cyanobacteria, blue-green algae. Then we have prokaryotes. They don't have a nucleus. None of them do. They don't have mitochondria, but they have ribosomes. And they reproduce asexually. Now, instead of just talking about Monerans, we've split them into 2 kingdoms. Okay, the 2 kingdoms that we have talked about are listed below, and you will need to split them apart and be able to tell the difference between the 2 kingdoms. So we have the 2 kingdoms. You need to split them up just like this. Bacteria, known as eubacteria, and cyanophytes, which are archaebacteria, right? We know these. Archaebacteria and eubacteria.
Singing. Turning like cytoplasm.
You should join choir.
Yeah.
Okay. We'll talk about the eubacteria first. This is the one, eubacteria, I think of true bacteria, the bacteria that you are probably most familiar with or have heard about and why you want to wash your hands all the time. Bacteria that live in your own gut. Okay, they cannot make their own food. They have to feed on things. Okay, some of them have endospores to protect their membranes, and here is an example of that down below. Okay, all they drew or we drew was a circular bacterium with nuclear material inside of it. Then around it, an endospore really is just like a protection, a shield that protects it when conditions are not ideal for its survival. So that could be extreme heat, extreme cold, or like chemicals that are not conducive for it respirating and surviving. Some of them can survive by having an endospore, protecting the nuclear material inside of it so that when conditions do become ideal, it can shed that endospore and go about its bacterium lifestyle. Okay. These are the bacteria that we'll look at on, well, tomorrow. And when we have our taste test on Wednesday, okay, that is where we will look at some of these bacteria. Bacteria are used to make cheese. So bacteria are used to feed on the sugars in milk, lactose, and those bacteria give the cheese distinct flavors, and you have different types of cheese, like mozzarella, cheddar, Gouda, Havarti, things like that. Also, yogurt is something that's made using bacteria, and there's live cultures in most yogurts. Okay. Also, we'll talk about on Wednesday the pickling process and why things are pickled. There are not bacteria used in that process. The pickling is used to prevent bacteria from getting into the food. So pickling provides longevity for the foods. So anyone ever gone to an establishment that has like pickled things on the counter? Yeah, pickled things, like things can. All right, so pickling is.
Hunter doesn't know what it is.
So pickled eggs, right? Like things that can be pickled to preserve them for longer periods of time. That makes sense?
So if you pickle a human, you can live forever.
No.
You can keep them from rotting for a while.
Okay.
Thanks, Liam. That's gonna help.
That's good.
Grandma.
Have you ever gone to weasels?
I haven't been weasels in a long time.
My family.
Liam, I swear, you're like a bot that was hired by your grandpa to promote.
Is there a point to that story?
Yeah, I have a recommendation.
What?
Liam's grandpa used to own it.
Well, it's Captain
That's really
America.
cool.
Well, now my grandma does, so.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Exactly.
What does that have to do with what's going on?
I mean,
The
it's
bacteria
to
that
advertise. No, it's pretty good. I mean,
Okay. Moving on. So then the other kingdom of bacteria that we talk about is archaebacteria. These are also known as cyanophytes or just cyanobacteria. Okay, these are blue-green and plant-like. Blue-green bacteria. They produce oxygen because Hunter, yes. What's the top? By the picture?
You mean the drawing, the diagram?
Not the diagram.
What?
It's like the title.
Two main groups.
Oh, so that's what that says. Okay. I can see it.
Are you okay? Okay. All right. Because they photosynthesize. They create their own food. And what is a byproduct of creating your own food? Oxygen. Okay. So these things produce oxygen as a byproduct. They produce their own food using chlorophyll. They need sunlight, right? Just like plants do. These are bacteria that are sometimes extremophiles. If you read letter E there, they're sometimes extremophiles. They can live in extreme environments. They can use, some of them can use chemicals such as sulfur for respiration. You and I cannot, right? Some of them live near vents in the ocean, which spew out chemicals, and they're able to survive on that using that sulfur as opposed to like oxygen and carbon dioxide.
I love
Yeah.
sulfur.
Is bacteria used to make stainless steel?
I don't know.
I'm gonna look
Anthony
that up.
says sulfur's not a thing.
Anthony thinks sulfur isn't real.
Yeah.
We'll make them
And
eat
he
something.
wasn't kidding either.
We'll make them.
Anthony, I hope you're kidding.
inside your body. We can make some. We can make
That's
them eat
really
something.
Anthony, I had several shipments of sulfur coming to my house.
Every once in a while, I
I'll
grow
bring
like
it.
little like mini volcanoes on my body. They are like really hard, and sulfur just spews.
I think you're talking about pimples.
All right. So this is another thing that you'll need to know for the quiz on Thursday. All right. There are 3 major shapes of bacteria that we're going to talk about. We already did a textbook assignment about this. Okay. So 3 major shapes of bacteria. We'll go back to it then. People are speaking.
Wait, can you put back on the E?
Nope, I can't. Thank you. In a bit, I will. 3 major shapes of bacteria. Okay, so you need to stay focused and less talking, more writing if we are not getting it. All right.
It says cocoa.
Go.
That would be kind of like.
Go join the
rewarding you for not. There are 3 major shapes of bacteria. Okay. We have round bacteria, and the way that I help remember it is circle or circular, because circle starts with C, so does coccus and cocci. Really, they are spherical because circular would mean it's 2D. So when you draw it, it's a circle, but really they are spherical. They're round like a ball, okay? But when you draw it, it may look like this. Circle is coccus or cocci. So you can make kind of a chart here, the English, the singular form, and the plural form. You'll notice in these plural forms, they do not end in S. They're those weird Latin words. And this spirilla should be spirilla instead of spirelli. Okay? Okay. The next one we'll talk about is the rod-shaped bacteria. So it looks like a rod here, kind of like a pill. Sometimes people think they look like a little hot dog. Okay? But that Latin name is bacillus. 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 And more than one is bacilli. That one, harder to remember because B doesn't start with R. Bacillus doesn't start with R like rod. To me, though, when we looked at the hunting nightmare bacteria, this was just like the typical bacteria that you see under a microscope. It looks like a rod. Looks like bacteria. I don't know, BAC. So that is how I remember it. And really, it's just, you got to come up with your own way. Round, the way that you can remember it is round is circle, starts with C. Spiral sounds like spirilla. And the other one is rod. Okay, so it's any way that you want to remember it. Go ahead. So then you have the spiral bacteria. It's a spirillum and spirilla. Questions on that? Okay. Hi, Hunter.
Okay, is the last one technically E?
Yeah.
What?
The last one looks like an E.
Cool down.
Last one looks like an E?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, I guess, kind of, whatever.
Mr. Dayton. Mr. Dayton.
What?
Anthony said a bad word. He said shut up.
Oh my God!
I'm a puke.
Rebel activity.
Okay,
No.
moving on. Okay, so when we name bacteria, and we'll look at them tomorrow, when we name bacteria, you need to use a prefix before you use their shape. Okay, prefixes are parts of words that come before the root word. Okay, so we have prefixes like re, pre, pro, okay, in, un, right? These are all prefixes. The prefixes used to describe bacteria generally tell how they're patterned or organized. Okay, so the first prefix that we talk about is diplo. I would underline or highlight the DI. DI means to, die, right? Okay, so diplo means they come in a pair. An example would be what they look like right here. This is round bacteria. How do we say round bacteria in Latin? Coccus. So this is a diplococcus, and that's how it would be stylized and talked about. That is a singular pair. Now, if I had multiple pairs, if I had multiple pairs, okay, it would be diplococci. Now, this is important because people every year when we take this quiz get this wrong because they don't look at the way the word is spelled. They will only have like one when it says diplococci, when it should be more than one pair, right? So here's diplococcus, here's diplococci. All All right. Then next one is Staphylo. Staphylo is a clump, or you may see it as a cluster. Clump or cluster. Looks like a cluster of grapes right there, right? So, Staphylo. Who's ever heard of a staph infection? Okay, staph infection now is named because the bacteria that cause the staph infection are clustered. Okay, this is an example of Staphylococcus,
Bibliococci.
right? Staphylococcus, because they are round. It's one clump, Staphylococcus. Next, we have Tetra. Okay. Tetra. If you have, who here has played Tetris before? How many blocks does each shape in Tetris have?
I think like one.
How many blocks does each shape in Tetris have?
Some of them.
4, right? And they are all made up of squares, right? So Tetris or Tetra means 4. Right here would be an example of Tetracoccus.
Quad was 4.
I really think anybody can.
Bibliococci.
Sorry, Mr. Dayton.
For what?
Yeah,
Holy good.
Carter
For
Carter.
Diplococci. Carter was making very fun of it, and I laughed.
It's so funny. I can't blame you, I guess. It's the most funny
Strepto,
thing.
Does that cause strep throat?
So then we're going to move on to the last one. Strepto is a chain. Strepto means chain. And yes, Carter just alluded to it. Strep throat is caused by
Bacteria.
a bacteria
Lewis.
that is in a chain, Streptococcus. And if you had more than one, so here's a chain. Oop, here's a chain. So we have a prefix for each of these and then a shape. Now, a coccus was used for each of these. There are examples of like chains of rods and spirals. Okay. So there you go. These are your prefixes. You will need to know all 4 of those and the 3 shapes. 4 prefixes, 3 shapes. Diplo means pair, Staphylo means cluster, Tetra means 4, and Strepto means chain. Really, in the name, Diplo and Tetra, those should be given away to you right away. Diplo, di means 2, and Tetra means 4. Okay, so quad is 4 too, yes. Quarter has something to do with 4 too.
I thought pairs too.
Yeah, we can go back to it. Okay, staph and strep, you need to be able to determine the difference between those. Staph is cluster and strepto. Strep is chain. Okay, so yes, those diseases, some of the diseases that we get are named after the bacteria that causes them. Not all, but some. Okay, so those are the shapes that you're going to need to know and the prefixes. Go back to this page. Okay. Some people said they needed this. There are the 2 main groups.
I'm not. I'm just using